I was actually the global head of mobile engineering for HSBC Bank. So I looked after one of the largest smartphone and tablet estates in the world, arguably. So about 70,000 smartphones, 3,000 tablets in 70 countries. So most of the complexities and challenges that you will see with mobile, I've generally had that headache at some point in the past. And indeed done that in one of the, as mentioned earlier by Citi, one of the most highly regulated environments. So the world of mobile, and this is kind of a potted history, if you like, a turbocharged version of that. So mobile's a really interesting space in many ways because it's one of those consumer-led technologies that's really been at the forefront of change within IT for the last sort of 10 to 12 years. I should imagine in a lot of organizations, when BlackBerry arrived, it would have been very much as a JFDI from the top of the organization, make this work kind of approach. And indeed, that happened again when things like the iPad came out. And it's been a constant stream of new technology coming towards the IT organization from the outside with a demand at the most senior level to make it work. And to a certain extent, we're starting to see that happening in the world of cloud as well. And if we were to fast forward to 2017, what's really interesting about the mobile space is it's kind of a roadmap for what happens on all the other endpoints behind the firewall to a certain extent. Mobile is really about balancing the opportunity and the functionality of that device against the risk of having something that's not formally directly under your control. One of the things that we've seen with mobile is that it cuts across all of the traditional technology silos in your organization. And indeed, even in the security side of the organization, it's one of those endpoints, it can do just about anything. So it's very hard to pigeonhole quite often. When you take traditional security controls to mobile, you are generally in charge of a very blunt set of instruments. So if you talk about device management, locking it down, turning it into a brick, if you do that, it's certainly possible to do, but clearly you kind of throw away the magic at the same time in that if it's really just turning, for example, an iPad into a giant BlackBerry that all you can do is your corporate email on it, then you've kind of missed the point with mobile. Mobile is all about the opportunity of the various applications that run on it and the fact that they are very easy to deploy, very easy to get out there. But ultimately, you need to police those apps. You need to stay on top of that. That's actually becoming an increasingly borderline impossible task. So let's say you take a decision, you want to whitelist the applications that you have on your estate. Real challenge there is just that if you take the view, right, I'm going to evaluate this app, I'm going to look at the functionality it's capable of doing. Does it connect to a cloud service? Does it have a chat function? Does it have all these various other things? Real problem there is you do that once, but that app can change at a moment's notice completely outside of your control. And then you've got an updated feature set in your estate that you weren't even aware of. So some of the traditional controls are really struggling to keep up with this. And one of the really interesting themes that came through earlier was that this kind of shadow IT and consumer-led technology. This is a real challenge because the reality is that everybody has a mobile as a personal device. Everybody tends to be a bit of an expert on their own device. They're quite passionate about these devices. They've had them. They've made a personal choice in them. They use them all the time. So someone who has an iPhone tends to be quite passionate about having an iPhone. Someone who has an Android, the same thing. And if you find someone who thinks that about Windows Phone, generally they're quite unique people. This is kind of a really interesting problem that quite often they feel that their personal technology solutions are superior to the ones that they are given by the enterprise. So, if you take a very simple application, something like the ability to take notes, someone who is a consumer of your secure solution will look at something like Evernote and say, actually, that's better, easier, simpler. It roams between all of my devices. I can do drawings, pictures, snapshots, all these things that are very rich in their functionality. And the danger, of course, is that they choose to do that completely behind or invisible to the IT function. So that kind of touches on what happens if you then layer cloud on top. So this is the other interesting thing, where mobile is increasingly a roadmap for what's happening in the wider IT space. So the mobile OS is basically designed to live on the internet. That's by definition. It was built to live on a carrier network, which is an internet-enabled network. Whereas your traditional endpoints, your Windows laptops, were obviously quite happy to be locked down, channel all the data back to the center. The mobile is, the more you try and turn a mobile into that older model, the harder your life is. But they are really the roadmap for where it's going. If you look at Windows 10, the full-fat version of Windows is basically becoming more and more of a mobile operating system. The patching regime for that operating system is more like a mobile one. So you have this basically consumerization of the operating system, and it's being used in the enterprise. So like I say, mobile is a bit of a roadmap there. And then you have this really interesting thing where the apps that people want to use on their mobile will have cloud features effectively hard-coded into them. You can't pick and choose. You have to take a monolithic decision about, do I allow this or not? So even if you don't formally have a cloud adoption strategy, you are adopting cloud by default. So, these two areas have really started to combine to give you a bit of a perfect storm. And quite often what we see in terms of businesses looking out across the customer estate is that you need a trigger really for when you really start thinking a lot about cloud. And the trigger quite often is Office. So Microsoft are not fools. It's the crown jewels, if you like, of Microsoft's technology stack. Office, they are absolutely running all of your businesses for you. They run our business for us. Every business runs on Office. It runs on spreadsheets, it runs on email, it runs on documents. Now, what's really interesting is it's the trigger in terms of what you need to do about the adoption of cloud to a large extent. Because, Microsoft are being very open about this. They're saying that in the future, everyone will use Office 365. It is their intention to demise on-premise Exchange and all these other features. So it will come. And what's really interesting, especially when you layer mobile on top, it's a great tool set. I mean, ultimately, there's a reason why everyone uses Office. It's very good. But on mobile, it's actually pretty awesome. If you're talking about OneDrive, the ability to synchronize documents between one device and another, the ability to be editing a document on your desktop and then sit down on the train, pick up your tablet, and you carry on exactly where you left off. Very clever stuff. And as a general pattern, we are seeing significant movement in this area across all sectors, including regulated. So we've got customers across most of the major sectors, very strong in legal and finance. This has become the year of Office 365. So we are talking about very large financial organizations are now deploying Office 365. One of the key problems that we see with all of this is the authentication into Office 365. So the crucial thing about Office and Microsoft in general is ultimately it all comes down to the identity. So you need to know your AD password. Your AD password synchronizes with the cloud. You enter your password on all these different devices. That's a problem if you think about it, because do you really want people typing the same credential that they have when they're in the office, when they're sitting on a train or in an airport, or you don't know who's behind them? And also doing that on a touchscreen device where it's pretty obvious if you're shoulder surfing what they're typing. So that's a key problem going forwards, and we see that as a challenge for the regulated customers we deal with. So you've kind of got identity as it's the problem, and increasingly with cloud continues to be, but it's also the solution ultimately to how you fix all of this. So obviously if you look back in time, the legacy, protecting the perimeter is still important. Everyone's still got data behind the firewall. Companies will have already deployed solutions in the past for remote access. So generally, you'll have some kind of VPN gateway. You will have the ability to connect back in. And you've probably done something like an RSA token or something like that to give you that two-factor authentication into the back end. And once you're behind the firewall, Active Directory is still your identity store once you're in. Now, cloud is kind of become a battleground for identity to a certain extent. So you will see that if you buy service from Microsoft, they want to be your identity provider for everything else. If you deal with Salesforce, they want to be the federation for everything. You know, many different companies really want to be the key masters to your identity going forward. And there's a good reason for that, because clearly it makes them very sticky with you. But the danger is, if you don't have a strategy at the beginning for cloud, is that you can end up with lots of different cloud services, but ultimately many identities across them, and you've effectively lost control. So is the answer to have a single identity across everything? Well, potentially, but then you've got to balance the risk of what happens if that one identity is lost. Now, that's all fine, and then you have the other problem on top, which is basically users. So users basically corrupt all of your security policy anyway. So they'll set all the passwords to be exactly the same. So even if you have different password policies across all your different platforms, they'll probably go for the most restrictive one and then make it the same on all of them anyway. They enter those passwords anywhere. So if you take remote and mobile devices into the mix, those passwords are being entered, could be anywhere, literally anywhere. They're very open to social engineering attacks. They're open to all the hacks that we've already talked about. You know, we talk about the Yahoo breach. We talk about the data that was lost there. If people are doing what people normally do, that means that passwords for the corporate world are already compromised. And that's before you then layer on new technologies like a man-in-the-middle attack to grab anything in clear text that's going on across a Wi-Fi network. I'm sure we all joined the Wi-Fi network here today. We all trust it because it's part of the building, but we really don't know. Anything in clear text that's gone across that network, it's game over, basically. So the answer really is you've got to control the identity, but you don't want to lose control of the identity. So it's a little bit of a challenge. It's a kind of a chicken and egg scenario. But one of the things that we sometimes see is people go back to the answer from the past to say, right, well, that must be the answer for the future. So two-factor auth is one of the things that's it's been around for a very, very long time. It is secure. It has provided the ability to control the perimeter of your networks. And can we use that to help secure the cloud, for example? Well, then you get into this whole concept of no, actually. So two-factor auth, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the idea behind it. It's just that when you get into the realities of deploying it, you end up with a number of fails, as we call them. So hard tokens. So I remember being responsible for a massive deployment of hard tokens that I then had to redeploy every single hard token because RSA lost the keys. That was not a fun day at the office. But the user experience of a hard token is actually pretty painful. It's like, I need to log in. Where's my token? Where's my key fob? Have I got it with me? Probably not. If you're on a mobile device, it's the most awful login experience you'll ever come across. And then you layer the users on top. So these are obviously fairly common. So if you look at, I mean, this kind of sums it up, really. Users will do whatever they need to do the functionality that they want. And this is, you know, these are genuine photos. These are not mock-ups. So they needed to share a token. Okay? We can put it on a webcam and put it on the internet. And now all bets are off. These are actual photos that have been out there. And I like the one on the right in particular because that's really quite an elaborate piece of work to massively undermine your security. Then you come on to the other sort of types of second factor. So, you know, you talk about the SMS token. So this is obviously about, you know, sending out a one-time code to a mobile device. Even a mobile network can be a weak link. Are you really able to trust the mobile network? And there are reasons to question that increasingly when you think about, is that device actually on a mobile network or is it on a pseudo-mobile network where it's actually effectively an IP phone? And so effectively all that data is transiting across an internet link now. As with anything, it can be open to social engineering attacks, so you can start to send spoofed SMSs to people that look like token codes, and all kinds of weird and wacky stuff can start to happen. You're then into the, something, question and answer, known, knowledge-based piece, obviously open to social engineering. Again, go back to the Yahoo hack. Basically, all of those answers are probably on a database with the bad guy somewhere. And anyway, the users always forget which questions they were and the answers that they gave. Then you have push to accept. Now, this is really interesting. Push to accept is a fantastic idea. It's like, I'm going to only send an authentication request to a known device. And then if a bad guy tries to log in, I'm going to send that request to the genuine user, and they're going to go, no, I'm not going to I don't allow that. I'm going to panic. Well, they don't panic at all. Most people just click yes. They're like, get it out of the way. Any notification on a mobile device, quite often, it's just yes. So now, all of that two-factor piece, now layer a mobile experience on top. And this is where kind of consumerization and the trend from the other side comes into play. So if we look at complex passwords, you just try and type a complex password on a mobile device. You're probably going to type it wrong 3 times before you type it right. It's going to be pretty obvious to anyone sat next to you what password you were aiming for. If you think about a mobile keyboard and just getting to the special characters. So everybody has special characters in their password, but on a mobile, that's actually really pretty painful. And then compare that with Apple Pay. If I want to actually tap in on the tube, I can do it with my thumbprint in seconds. And that, I think most people would agree that Apple Pay is fundamentally a secure technology. And they've built that security, but they've actually thought about the usability of the security at the same time. Which is why we think that two-factor on its own is not the answer going forward. So what we really believe is the way to start looking at this is actually going through a kind of pre-authentication risk analysis. So what we're saying here is let's take a layered approach to risk analysis and therefore increase the security for the user logging in, because this is effectively the perimeter of the cloud. If you can stop the bad guy being able to even try to log in, then you've stood a much better chance of protecting that virtual firewall, if you like, that sits around the edge of your services. So the beauty of some of this stuff is that it doesn't actually impact genuine users. Genuinely, if you're the actual person, all of this stuff basically is invisible. You only present multi-factor authentication when you really need to. And it's the number of factors that you take into account here that allow you to build a much better layered security policy about how you will allow access to different types of systems, different types of user class, for example, based on your information classification. So, if you go into a bit more detail about what all these things are, what we're really talking about in this, and apologies for the small font, but at the top we're really, first of all, we'll have a fingerprint on the device. Do we know, is this a device we've seen before and successfully authorized before? We'll go into proper threat services and look at the IP. And this is really cool because you shouldn't really have genuine users trying to log in from a Tor exit node. It's pretty obvious, but a lot of traditional security products will basically say, did you enter the right credentials, yes or no? It's a binary switch. This is obviously looking at it to say, right, if you've done that, you're not even going to be asked to enter any credentials. You can obviously go into directories, look at what are these guys capable of doing? Are they logging in from a country that I'm comfortable with? So, it's pretty obvious. If you don't have any users in Russia, then why are you getting any requests to log in from Russia? Same with geo-velocity. Did they log in this morning in London and now 2 hours later they're in Russia? Well, clearly that's geo-velocity rules kicking in. There's no way they could physically have traveled that fast. Geofencing, you can potentially start to say, right, because they're in the office, I'm going to give them a more elevated level of privilege, or alternatively, I'm not going to challenge as much when they're in the office versus when they're not. And then you can start to really build up lots more layers in terms of the identity governance, fraud detection and prevention. Behavioral analytics is really quite interesting. So over time, you build up a normal pattern of behavior for a user. So your user normally logs in at the office in the morning, they log in on the train on the way home, they log in at the weekend every once in a while. If they suddenly start logging in all the time, or they're trying to log in lots and lots of times in the middle of the night, then again, that's clearly something gone wrong. And then you get to the really cool stuff, which is like behavioral biometrics. So the bad guy has compromised all of the information that the user has. They actually know their password. They've got access to get in. But because they don't type the password in the same way as a genuine user does, suddenly you can actually challenge them for more authentication above and beyond what the normal user would have got. And so you kind of build up this layer upon layer of security where the bad guys will get filtered out. But crucially, the genuine users don't even know it's there. It actually makes their life easier, not harder. And so in terms of a brief summary on where we are, for us, we do believe that two-factor authentication on its own is not enough anymore. And I think this is true whether you're looking at the perimeter of your network or whether you're looking at cloud services going forwards. This multi-factored authentication is ultimately the way to move forward. It's going to stop more bad people by default. You're talking about hackers gaining access to your servers. Well, if they've never even got a login prompt, then you're a heck of a lot better off than them trying to even inject multiple passwords on multiple occasions. It's actually better for genuine people, but crucially, you can actually start to say, right, I've got my existing technology, I've got the new cloud services coming on. I can actually have everything authenticating in the same way so that you get a consistent login experience across everything. And crucially as well, if you're logged into the first piece, then why would you be challenged to log in again? It gives you that kind of single sign-on capability, almost by design. It's built in. But for us, one of the key things and the reasons why we're so excited about this is because it's actually built around mobile devices in mind. It's designed to optimize the mobile login experience as well. It's designed to build on the sensors that are on the mobile device as, if you like, data inputs to your validation process. So do you want to do something with the thumbprint, for example? Well, you can. And that could even be something where you want to log in through a browser to a full-fat session, but you can use the mobile and the thumbprint on that mobile as part of the authentication experience. So I think this is the really interesting thing for us is users will work around whatever you do unless you get this sort of stuff right. So if it's difficult to use, generally they will find a better way. They always do, and I use Evernote as a good case in point. You will see this happen first on mobile. Mobile is the forefront of shadow IT. And I would challenge you to do you really know which apps your users are using? And I think if you take your corporate devices to one side and you accept that everybody in the room has got their own device in the pocket as well, do you really know what they're using those devices for? Because the answer is no, you don't. Really, you can't. And so hopefully that's a useful introduction to the world of multi-factor auth and why we feel this is definitely a step forward from the traditional way of authenticating. For Mobility, this is ultimately what we're all about. We deliver mobility and cloud security. We can do that as a service to the enterprise. In terms of us, we're over in the corner. We've got a fantastic demonstration we can go through just to show all of this technology in action so you can really see the authentication working. And I believe there's also a security drone raffle going to happen for if you really want to go and spy on the neighbours. So come over and see us in the corner. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.